Pesach is a time that we experience Moichin the Gadlus, which is expansive mind. And part of the understanding of Pesach is that we don't have to prepare for Pesach, even though a lot of preparations go on for Pesach. But if you look through in the Talmudic tradition, if you lived a few thousand years ago, or 1,500 years ago, or before people had big homes, Pesach, you prepared the night before Pesach, you cleaned your home the night before. Bedikas Chametz was actually checking for the Chametz was that night. You didn't do Bedikas Chametz 30 days before Pesach to clean your house. They had one room and they cleaned their house the night before Pesach, and then Pesach came. Today people live in bigger homes, so they have to prepare cleaning much earlier. But the understanding is because Pesach is really an opening. The word Pesach comes from the idea of Pasach, which is a door, an opening. Also the idea of compassion, of kindness, that we were brought into a place coming from a place of exile, internal exile, of restriction of Egypt, to a place of redemption, even though we were not equipped for the experience. So unlike Rosh Hashanah or the holidays that are in the month of Tishrei, which is very much about preparing yourself until you get into the Yom Tov, Pesach is really about an opening, and everyone has accessibility to the Yom Tov, to the holiday. I'm going to talk a little bit of something that's relevant to the Torah portion that we read this week, and see how it's connected a little bit. In this week's Torah portion, we read about the idea of a Metzora. A Metzora is someone that has, it looks like leprosy, but it's a certain skin pigmentation. And this doesn't exist anymore, this type of disease, even though physically you see people that maybe have a physical discoloring in their body, but it's not the actual biblical description of leprosy, of tsaras. And the Torah uses the word Nega. That's what it's called. This person has a Nega. Nega is spelled Nun Gimel Ayin. That's the word Nega. Now there's a very interesting passage that Sefer Yetzirah tells us, that Sefer Yetzirah writes that Ein L'mayla Oneg ve'ein lamata Nega. There's nothing higher than Oneg. Oneg also has the same three letters, Ayin Nun Gimel. There's nothing higher than pleasure. Oneg is a word for pleasure. And there's nothing lower than Nega, Nun Gimel Ayin, versus Ayin Nun Gimel. They have the same three letters, but the Sefer Yetzirah says there's nothing higher than Oneg and nothing lower than Nega. On a simple definition, what this means is that Oneg is pleasure. Pleasure represents unification. When one thing is unifying with something else, it could be with another person, another object, another idea. And Nega is the opposite. Nega causes separation, and that's why the way the Torah describes a person that has tsaras, a person that has this Nega, this skin discoloring, this person has to separate themselves from the community. Yes, Badad Yeshav, he has to sit alone. So there's the idea of separation. Instead of connecting, he has to, or she has to sit alone. The tradition also is from the Talmud that the Nega comes from Lashon Hara, from negative speech, which causes a friction, a separation between people. And like the Zohar writes, that the word Metzora comes from the word Motzera, someone that ejects negativity. So someone that's ejecting negativity, meaning externalizing negativity. A reflection in terms of the cause and effect is also that their external part of their body also shows up as a negative skin pigmentation. So if they cause separation between people, then the way to heal is actually to separate themselves, to learn what it means to become Oneg, what it means to be a pleasure, and to enter into relationships with others. So if you take these three words, these three letters that spell the word Nega, Nun Gimel Ayin, so the Arizal writes that the word Nun Gimel Ayin also is an acronym. The word Nega and the word Oneg is an acronym. Nun Gimel Ayin stands for Nar Gan Eden. Nar is the river of Gan Eden. Nar is river, Gan is the garden, and Eden is Eden. So the river of the Garden of Eden, those three letters in that order spell the word Nega, spell the word this negative skin pigmentation. The opposite, if you take the words Oneg, which is Ayin Nun Gimel, Oneg, then you have Eden Nar Gan. So you have Eden, Then you have Nar, which is the river. And then you have Gan, which is the garden. So there's something about this formation of these three letters that either it's the river, the garden, and Eden versus Eden, the river, and the garden. So what is these what does this represent? Is it works like this. Oneg is pleasure. And the source of pleasure, the source of desire, the root of desire is always positive. The root of every single desire that a person has at all times is always a positive thing. Now, it doesn't mean that the vessel of desire is positive. So there's we'll differentiate in every desire. There's the light of the desire, the aura of the desire, and there's the kli of the desire. Let's say a person desires to buy an extra pair of shoes that they don't need. I don't know, I guess some people have such desires. So you have a desire, there's the light of the desire and the vessel of desire. So let's think about this. The vessel of desire, if you wouldn't define desire needs this pair of shoes. But if you go to what is the core of that desire, what's the light of that desire? The core of the desire is that you feel a certain emptiness, for whatever reason it is, and you feel like if you're going to have this object in your life, it's going to create a connection, and you're going to feel a certain completeness. This is with any type of desire. There's the urge, the desire that you have to get that thing or do this thing, and somehow it's going to fill a certain need. So if you can strip the desire and separate the kli from the or, if you can separate the vessel from the light, then you can actually find out what's really troubling you. Let's say you have a desire for something that you shouldn't really have. The vessel of the desire is completely not something that's attainable, and it's not something that you should attain. So you have to ask yourself the question, why am I desiring these things? What is it telling me about myself? Is there something wrong within myself, or is something bothering me that I'm looking for such desires? So in other words, the desire in itself, without the vessel, is something positive. Either it always is telling me something about myself, or in the language of the Baal Shem Tov, it's showing that there's some connection of sparks. Or the Arizal writes, there's the elevation of sparks, that there's some sparks that are connected with me, meaning my soul elevation, my soul tikkun, correction is connected with this particular object, subject, or person. That's the light part of it. And then there's something about the vessel that maybe in this particular situation I'm supposed to pursue this desire, and in this situation I'm not supposed to pursue desire. So again, we have to make a difference between the core of the desire, which is something that's positive. Positive meaning that it's showing that there's a soul connection between me and this thing. What's the soul connection? It could be the soul connection is that I shouldn't achieve it, I shouldn't attain it, I shouldn't look for it, but it's telling me something about my own tikkun. So this is the elevation of sparks. The elevation of sparks is not everything that you see you get and then you have it. That's not elevation of sparks. Elevation of sparks is sometimes you elevate it through engagement, and sometimes you elevate something, which essentially means you're elevating yourself through disengaging from the thing. So this is a certain gauge that actually allows you to see what is it going on in your own self that needs tikkun. Okay, so that's the light of the desire. You're following? So the actual core of the desire is always positive. Every single desire that we have is always positive. It's the shell, the vessel of the desire that sometimes can be a klipa, right? A klipa means that it's a concealment, it's something that's negative. Or if it's a positive thing, it's only or, it's only light, which means that I should engage in this desire. Okay. So let's think about this a second. So we have this concept at the core of every desire, and if you trace it according to the Magid, the student of the Baal Shem Tov, you can trace all desires essentially to two basic human needs. One is the need of chesed, and one is the need of gvura. One is the expansion, the connection, the outwardness, to going forward, moving out, and one is the gvura, is the opposite, going inward and creating discipline. So there's either a movement outward or a movement inward. These are two movements that we're always moving in either direction. And every single emotion that we have can be traced to these two emotions. So every desire can really be traced to these emotions. Is it a desire, again, like you said, is it a desire for me to connect with this object? Do I have something to gain by engaging with this person? Or is it opposite? Is something telling me that I have to refrain from this situation, right? So either it's chesed mode, which means I'm engaging, or it's gvura mode, which is I'm separating. But it's always telling me something, either chesed or gvura. And that's the root of every desire. When you have the structure of Nega, which is Nun, Gimel, Ayin, Nar Gan Eden. Nar Gan Eden can also be seen as three stages. Nar, which is the river, represents water, which represents desire itself. So this desire. Gan is satisfaction. That's the garden of satisfaction. And Eden, without a Nar and a Gan, Eden without the river and without the garden is empty. Eden doesn't have anything besides a river running through it that's watering the garden. But if you take the garden and the river outside of Eden, Eden is empty. This could be a positive emptiness or a negative emptiness, but it's empty. So if you follow the structure of Nega, you have desire or pleasure, desire, satisfaction, emptiness. Okay? That's a Nega, that's a negative thing. The opposite is Oneg, which is positive pleasure, positive desire, is that it first starts from Eden, which is emptiness, then it goes to Nar, and then to Gan. Then it goes to pleasure, and then it goes to satisfaction. Let's try to just bring it down a little bit more practical. A person has a desire for something, and your first instincts, because you're having this very strong desire, let's just give an example. Let's say you're desiring a particular piece of food, but obviously you can use your own imagination. It can be many other things in life, but let's say you're desiring this piece of food. You've eaten already. There's no reason why you're hungry. It's not that you're hungry for this food, and you have this desire. It's an extra piece of cake that's here, and you're desiring it. If you start from the place of your desire and then move to the place of your satisfaction, ultimately you'll feel empty. Meaning, if your guiding principle is, am I going to engage with this desire, this pleasure that I want? I have this desire, I want it, I'm going to get it. I'm going to involve myself in this pleasure. I'm going to indulge myself in this pleasure. I'm going to have satisfaction for meeting it. But since the guiding principle of why I'm involved with this is my pleasure principle, right? Therefore, there's no boundaries how much I eat. I eat as much as I can until I get stuffed. So there's pleasure, satisfaction, and the end result is a feeling of emptiness. Emptiness means you feel sick physically, it can be emotionally you feel sick, you feel empty, literally you feel existentially empty. You pursue something, and if the guiding principle is your pleasure, you pursue it, you're satisfied, and then you're left empty. The same emptiness that you felt before, then that's the reason why you pursued it. If your guiding principle is your pleasure, and that's why you're pursuing it, so you pursue it, satisfaction and emptiness. You're following? That's the idea of Nega. That's a negative expression of desire. The negative expression of desire is that you're desiring it, you pursue it, you do gain satisfaction, but at the end, after you're satisfied, you're left with nothing. Okay? That's all types of physical desire. When it starts off with the idea of the pleasure, when Oneg when Nahar is the first thing, when the pleasure is the first principle. If you reverse this image, which will be the idea of Oneg, true pleasure, then you have Eden Nar Gan. Eden Nar Gan is emptiness, pleasure, and then satisfaction. Which means when you end satisfied, and there's no emptiness that follows. So what it's really trying to say is that if you start with an emptiness before you have a desire, what is an emptiness? I'll tell you what this means in a moment. If you start with an emptiness before the desire, then you have the desire, then you get satisfaction, you'll always be satisfied of what you've done. Meaning you'll always live with, you're not going to live with regret, and you're going to be satisfied after you finish. Let's try to understand this in terms of very simply a piece of cake. If you see something in front of you, and your first instincts is, yes, you have a desire to eat it, but your first instincts and your guiding principle is going to be, I don't need it. or I could live without it. That means I'm empty from it. I don't need it. Another word for that would be, you can use ishtavut, equanimity, or you can say the word moach, which is in mind. You're just standing separate from it. So you have this desire. Before you indulge in this, give yourself 10 seconds, 20 seconds, a minute, to just separate yourself from it, to be empty of it, to let go of it for a second. I'm not saying not to have that pleasure, but just to stay for 60 seconds without it. I don't need it. It's here. I can control myself. I don't need to eat this. Okay, if you can do that, which means if you can practice that emptiness in the beginning, then you can have pleasure, which is Oneg. So you'll start with Aiden, which is empty, Nar, which is pleasure, desire, and then you can be gone. You'll have satisfaction, because then when you'll eat, because you're eating not because your desires are overwhelming you to the sense that you lack self-control and you completely indulge yourself, but because you're separating from it for one moment, then you can do the same thing. You can follow the same process. You're having pleasure to get the satisfaction, but you'll have full satisfaction of it. Meaning, on simple level, you won't overeat, and if it's a desire that you should have, you'll fill the desire in a healthy way, and the after effects of the desire will be permanent. You'll feel satisfied always for that desire that you fulfilled. If it's a negative desire, you'll feel empty after the desire. And if it's a positive desire, because you waited one moment and stepped aside and asked yourself the question, do I really need it? Then even after the satisfaction, there'll always be a residue of that satisfaction that you had. It's a much more permanent experience. Another way of phrasing this is if you look at the word melech, the word king. Now, king is a word that we don't really use in our vocabulary, but melech would be translated as a master, someone that is a king of themselves, someone that's a master of themselves. If you take the 3 Hebrew letters that comprise the word melech, you have mem, lamed, chaf. Mem, lamed, chaf is mem. The first letter stands for the word moach, which is mind. The second letter stands for the word lev, which is heart. The final letter chaf stands for the word kaved, which is the digestion, your liver. Mind, heart, liver. If you're a master, then liver, let's start from the bottom. Liver represents the place where it's digested and it becomes integrated, becomes part of your body. The lev is the place of your desire. The mind is the place where you decide that you want this desire. If the path is your mind controls your heart, you stop for one moment and you say, do I really need it? Is this something I really should be engaged in? Or this is something, the core of the desire, remember, the core of the desire is telling you something. The reason why you're having this desire is indicative and is some type of soul connection that you have with this subject person. It's telling you something. The only question is, what is it telling you? The normal reaction, the way most people live, is because I'm having this desire. I want to indulge in it, right? So the next step is complete indulgence. They're not stopping for the 30 seconds or the 1 minute or the 10 minutes to ask themselves, why am I having this desire? But if you do ask yourself that question, why are you having that desire? Meaning there's the controlling moach, the mind, controls the heart, which is the desire. And then you receive that desire in any way, then you're able to digest it. That means you'll gain satisfaction. It's following the same path. It's an Oneg. It's the emptiness, the mind, the separation, the being objective. The second stage is the enjoyment actually of the pleasure, which is the place of the heart, the lev. And the third place is the place of satisfaction, which is the liver. You will have satisfaction not only now, but for a longer period of time. One of the clues to know about the choices that we make in life, whether the choices are correct, is a correct choice or not a correct choice. Let's say it's not very clear to us what is the right choice to make. And we're set with the situation. Do we make this choice or make the other choice? One of the ways to know, at least retroactively, to know if the choices that we made were correct choices is to notice how we feel after the choices were made. Not when after the choice is made, and you made this choice, how are you feeling after? If you still feel good about the choice that you made, so long as you're a person that's really a little bit in touch with yourself, then you know that's the correct choice, because then you're feeling the satisfaction of the choice even afterwards. If you make a choice to do this, 10 minutes later, and you do the choice, or you decide to do something, and 10 minutes later you regret everything that you made this choice, then it's probably a negative choice. Why? Because negativity, by definition, is something that doesn't last. Because what comes after the satisfaction of a negative choice is the emptiness. Whether you indulge in it or you don't indulge in it. But the actual choice itself will leave you with the sense of emptiness. What comes from a positive choice is a sense of satisfaction that will come afterwards. So again, in very simple terms, there has to be these three stages in order to transform something from a nega, which is Sefer Yetzirah says the nega is the lowest. Ein lamata nega. There's nothing lower than nega. To transform it into oneg, to transform it into positive pleasure, is you have a desire for something, for whatever it is. You're feeling this desire for something. You practice these three steps. First step is that you stop before you indulge for one moment, and you remain objective from this desire. You try to remain empty of the desire. You can think about it in terms of, I'm very happy without this thing in my life. That's another way of being really objective about it. I don't really need it. It's not something I have to have, but I could have it if I want, and maybe it will be very pleasurable for me, but I can actually stand separate from it. Okay, so once you separate yourself from it, then you ask yourself the question, do I want it? Do I need it? Should I pursue it? Let's say it's something that tells you, yes, you should pursue, then go ahead and enjoy it, and then you'll have satisfaction, and it'll be permanent. Because the satisfaction and the desire that you have will come from a place of moach, leif kavod, from the mind, heart, to the liver. If you're having a desire, and maybe you do know that in truth that every desire is a positive desire, and you desire it, and you just completely consume yourself with the desire, you don't refrain from it for even 10 seconds, for 20 seconds, you'll find yourself enjoying the pleasure while you're having the pleasure. You'll even find satisfaction of the pleasure at some moments while you're indulging in that pleasure, but it's guaranteed that the moment the pleasure is over, you're going to feel completely empty and completely bereft. Either this is physically, emotionally, or spiritually, you're going to feel sick. That's the process, the difference between something that's an oneg, something that's true pleasure, versus something that's positive, versus something that's negative, that's considered a nega. So this process of transforming and making sure that our desires are correct and able to stand back for one moment is something we can also do in terms of a meditative practice, even internally, if we're not even talking about objects. But let's say a person is in the middle of praying, in the middle of studying, or in the middle of just doing their work, and they're trying to focus on one thing, and a strong desire comes up for something else. You're trying to focus on this particular text that you're reading, or this particular job that you have to be doing, or you're praying, you're doing something that's a spiritual, a very important work that you have to be doing, and your mind has to be engaged in what you're doing, but somehow you find your mind floating in all different directions, which is very normal for the mind to do. It seems like the mind has its mind of its own, right? And it goes all these interesting places. And something keeps on reoccurring. So the truth is that on one level, most people would say, okay, just push it aside, just focus on what you're doing, and get on with the program. But the truth is that if something keeps on coming up, it's telling you something. The fact that you're having this thought and you're having this feeling is telling you something about yourself at this present moment, right? Otherwise, your subconscious wouldn't be talking to you in this way. So if a recurring thought or feeling, a sensation keeps on coming up, instead of ignoring it, the question you should really ask yourself, the question is, why am I feeling this sensation? Why do I have this thought? What's the core of this thought? Why am I having this thought? Why is this thought keep on coming up? So it can be a very strange thought, and you can use your own imagination what it can be. But you're trying to focus on one thing, and you're having a very strange thought, completely a foreign thought to you, something that's very unfamiliar maybe, and you're wondering where this thought comes from. Try to think for a few moments if you can, first of all, try to strip the vessel from the light. Try to understand what is the core of the thought. Okay, I know what the story is. You know what the story of the thought is and what the vessel is and how it's expressing itself. But what is it telling me about myself? There's something missing in my life. I'm missing connections. I'm missing feeling good about myself. What is it trying to tell me about myself? That's a very important question. And if it's something that keeps on coming up and I say that maybe I actually have to pursue it, if you can separate yourself and really think about it and then say, okay, maybe I should pursue it, then you should pursue it. It's a pleasurable thing, and even if it's a pleasurable thing, you'll have a good satisfaction of it. But certainly don't act impulsively on those thoughts. Because yes, it's telling you something, but it's only going to tell you something healthy and something productive if you can separate yourself for a few moments and try to separate the light from the vessel.